Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 6 of Tea and Type, your time to chill and make words. I'm MK England.
And I'm Jamie Paxton. And this is our second installment of the project start to finish. So that's where we take you all the way from the beginning of an idea all the way through a finished novel. What you drinking this week, Megan?
So a while back, I got this little holiday teas sampler from Adagio that had all of these weird little things. There's a pumpkin spice one in there that I am absolutely not drinking. But what I did decide to try today is this candy apple one, because I'm trying to pretend that this 5 days of cool weather we've had is actually the start of fall. Because I love fall and it's my favorite. So got that.
There you go.
How about you? What are you drinking?
I'm drinking water.
That's good for you. Water is good for you, Jamie. I support you.
I didn't have time to make tea before all of the evening things got settled. But all right, moving on. Lots to talk about.
Yes. And just apologizing ahead of time. My allergies are like murder today. So if I'm scratchy or really delirious, then just forgive me. Thanks.
I'll just steer you back on track.
Yes, thanks. So our topic of the week, last week we talked about picking which project you want to work on next, which for me is usually really difficult. So say that you have already picked the idea that you want to work on. Now it's time to develop that idea a little bit, which is usually, at least for me, kind of a messy disaster of a transition time period where I figure out what the hell is going on. So what's that period like for you, Jamie?
I think you nailed it with messy disaster of a transition time. And, we were talking about this episode, and so this is the messy transition episode. So in changes for me with every book, it's a different process of getting the idea, and then actually going, maintains is, everything's up for grabs until I sit down to start writing, and then I'm going to work on a draft all the way through. But, as we've talked about, sometimes I find a character and I say, I want to write a girl or a boy do this thing, and then I figure out the plot from there. Sometimes I start with the world or something like that. It's never so clear to me. I've heard writers who I really admire who say, I always start with the world. Everything else comes from that. And I'm just not that kind of writer. But if you can do it that way, if your world building is that intense and strong, that makes sense to me. But what about you?
Well, it definitely varies from book to book, like you said. I think we first have to give a little shout out to those, strange users who can just go straight from choosing the idea they want to work on and just dive right into the manuscript. I salute you. I will never be you. The thought of that terrifies me. And I don't actually know how people do that. I think most of us at least need to do some limited amount of planning, even if you're a total pantser, some level of thinking about what characters you're going to write about, or at least some vague direction for the plot. So for me, I absolutely have to lock in that overall plot arc. I just have to know how it's going to end, really, and at least have some vague idea for how I'm going to get there. I don't need plot points yet. I don't need any of that. I just need the general direction, and from there I can figure out some characters. I usually will already have one really strong character voice by this point, but from there I'll flesh out the rest of my cast. I really like ensemble casts, so I'll probably develop a few other characters. Start working on, some character sheets, because I'm a dork and I really like those things.
Do you do those, you think, because you did Dungeons and Dragons? Do you feel like that's a carryover from your D&D?
I definitely do. And I will actually take some of my role-playing books out and go through, the Serenity role-playing system has this big system of assets and complications, and I really like how that kind of gives my characters a little bit of balance. So sometimes I'll literally flip through the RPG books and, consider my characters through that light. What class would they be? Yeah. Is this a rogue? Hopefully that doesn't show through too much. But
no, I think it's a good idea. Those are good resources. There's thousands of books out there on how to build a character, or where to start your novel or something like that. But yeah, if you know how to use those sheets, I think that's a very, very good idea. So,
and I think there's just some element of like, it's satisfying to fill out a form in some ways. I don't know. I'm one of those people that's always like a little bit enjoyed paperwork.
Yes.
I know. Yes, you're right. That's me. I'm a giant nerd. Who's surprised?
No, it's not even nerdy. It's satisfying, right? Because, and I think this is kind of speaks to the point of the entire episode, which is this messy transition thing, right? Brain work or brainstorming, planning. These are, well, I guess at the beginning of a creative project, it is messy. And so anything that you can check off or say, I've done this, or here's the sheet, it's very satisfying. And honestly, I know you were talking about procrastinating when you're at a certain point in a project, and I clean. Well, I clean because I have to, but I, clean out of, not necessity when I'm either super upset or when I'm totally procrastinating or trying to think through a project because I'm doing something busy with my hands. It feels like I've accomplished something. And then I'm working through things in my head. My house is a filthy wreck by the time I start drafting, which is amazing.
Same.
Right? Because, then you neglect it all because you've got words to put down. But this idea that, yeah, I mean, it is like, oh, this metaphor works well. I mean, it is messy in these beginning stages. And so any order you can impose is fantastic. And I like to make checklists. I make a lot of checklists, and then I make a lot of printed forms on my computer that say, here are your writing goals. And then I put them on my calendar, and then maybe I put them into my phone. There's about 4 levels of redundancy here, all to make me feel like I've done something that is not actually writing. And then all that goes out the window once I, actually have a solid outline and start drafting. But I think that's part of the process too. And to know it and to own it means that you're not going to get emotionally tied up in, oh, I should not be doing this. I should be writing. No, you're doing something that's contributing to that,
No, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And I am definitely big on the like things that feel like work, even though they're not quite, the work of writing.
Yeah.
I do a lot of that in preparation for writing a manuscript. I think, and this is the part of the process that usually carries over while I'm still working on something else. Like right now I'm finishing up Disasters revisions. I think I'll be done tomorrow. And awesome. Well, I say that now, we'll see. So while I'm going through that, I'm sort of in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of characters, I'm thinking of general plot directions, for the next project. And I do a lot of that sort of pre-writing work during that time frame. Yeah. So I think the thing that I do right before I'm ready to start writing, that is when I like hardcore outline, where I actually will go pretty much chapter by chapter, like what needs to happen to get from point A to point Z.
Yep.
And I don't always carry that outline all the way through the book. I might go through like the first third or the first half like that, because I'm inevitably going to veer off the path, and that's fine. Or I get to a certain point where I know what happens, and then after that I'm a little foggy, and that's fine. I usually figure it out along the way. So
yeah, and we both have storytelling books and plans and things that we love. There's this, this one that we both really, subscribe to, except in these early stages. Like I wrote an outline for a book yesterday, and it's a book that's been in my head for a while, and I just sat down and I pounded out like a 22 chapter outline, and it's here's what happens in each chapter, quick, and what's going to happen is eventually this outline will become my synopsis, not 20 paragraphs of synopsis, but the heart of everything that's supposed to happen is there. And then I would go back and change a little. Oh, wait, I've got to think about that. It's not particularly clean, but it does have the arc of the entire story, beginning, middle, and end. And I've found that that's what I have to do, because I spent like 3 years writing the first book I ever finished, and it was only like 40,000 words long. They were a hard-fought 40,000 words, because I just kept going back and checking this and checking that and changing that and didn't know where I was going. So yeah, on that kind of outlining and stuff and thinking of the next thing. But
definitely. And these things are definitely useful going forward when it's time to write your query letter and write your synopsis and all of that. It's good to sort of see things laid out in that high level way.
Do you write those before though? Like even still, now that you have an agent, would you write your query and synopsis even before you start drafting as a guide?
Sometimes. Sometimes I find it helps me clarify what is hooky about the manuscript. I like to write, even if it's not a full query letter, I like to write like a Twitter-sized pitch or a Pitch War-sized pitch, which is like 50 words or something like that, because it just really helps me boil down, like, what is the point of the story? what's exciting about it, what's unique about it. And if I have that in my mind, that forms the heart of the story, and that drives my entire drafting process. And that's the lens through which I, work on everything for the entire story. So,
and I think too, if you can't articulate that, vision at the point of after you've had the idea, then you have more development to do. Not you personally, but I mean, one has more to myself. And it's kind of, I'm a huge Project Runaway fan. I don't know if you watch that show, but you have these designers. We don't need to talk about that. But same idea. Like you have these designers who have their concept or whatever their task is, make evening wear for whatever. And everybody's visions are so different. And then you have these designers who, when the critiques come around, they're like, well, maybe they can't really articulate what their vision is. And so unless they completely scrap it, or whatever Project Runway, make it work miracle happens. But inevitably, the ones who really don't have a clear sense or pitchy sort of hook to their garment, sorry, this is falling apart, they don't do as well. And so I think as a writer, too, you're always got to be thinking about that 2 to 3 sentence elevator pitch. And then how can you turn that into a novel? And that's a really good thing to develop, I think, at this stage, if possible.
Yeah, if possible. I'm sure there are people who, completely discovery write their way through an entire novel, and then they find that heart along the way. For me, I find it useful to do it ahead of time so that I can let that guide my process. And I actually recently have written the synopsis for 3 different novels before ever writing the first chapter. And I actually found that kind of interesting because, again, even a synopsis, you don't put everything in there. It's really just a prose version of your outline in a way. So I actually enjoyed that process.
Well, what's nice about that, too, is you have to include emotional stakes and emotional arcs. And so you're not just saying, here's the plot and here's what happens. Here's why it matters to your characters. Here's the resolution they find internally and externally. And here's kind of how that impacts those around them. And so, again, if you can articulate all of that, a lot of your work is done, then you've just got to find the words to fill in.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah. So I think going forward from here for our future portions of this project start to finish, we are going to talk about some of the things that you might want to develop before you start drafting. We'll go in depth about developing characters before you start the work of drafting. We'll talk a little bit about story structure, and then we'll dive right into actually drafting.
And we're so excited about that. Yeah, we're excited because you're going to talk about like descriptions and reading like a writer, and these things that we love and notice. And so
yes, and we also
have a lot of guests coming up.
Projects. Yes. There's going to be a guest next week because I am going to be out of town, so I am ditching Jamie. She's going to be doing the episode all by her lonesome, except not by yourself because you'll have a guest. So it's going to be a great episode. Please do tune in for that. So if you have any suggestions that you want to see us talk about, either as part of the Project Start to Finish series or just in general, you can send us an email at ttypewrite@gmail.com or use the hashtag AskTandType on Twitter. And we would love to hear your suggestions.
Ending this week. What are you recommending?
I am going to recommend 2 things, actually. I was out of town this past weekend. I went to hang out with a friend along the Chesapeake Bay, and so I'm going to recommend sunlight.
Fresh air.
Yeah. So I don't get a whole lot of sunlight. Like, my job is indoors. My walk to work is like a minute and a half. So, and then I'm locked inside my house, and like I throw open my windows and everything, but it's different being outside and soaking up some sunlight, and it just has an incredible impact on my mood and the way I feel and the way I write. Ultimately, I feel more energetic about my writing. So, hey, get some sunlight once in a while. But I'm also going to recommend an amazing board game called Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, which I am totally obsessed with. It's only for 4 players max, so it's a little bit limiting, but it's a great deck building game that actually takes you through year 1 all the way through year 7. And what's interesting about it is the mechanics get more and more complicated through each year. They'll add like new mechanics, new rules, new elements, new villains. And so the game itself gets more and more complicated as you go on. So it's really fun. It's really addictive, and I highly recommend it. What about you, Jamie? What do you recommend this week?
That sounds awesome. I recommend putting a hammock in your backyard immediately, because we just set ours up and it was amazing. I laid in there for about a while yesterday. It's very centering, and I think artists need that. You need to recharge. But the thing I recommend this week, actually, I'm still reading some of the same books. I've been working on a big project. But I actually started watching, the show's called Abstract. It's on Netflix. It's a Netflix original. And so it's just, it's a documentary about artists. I've only watched the first episode twice. The first episode is with illustrator Christoph Niemann, and he has done a ridiculous amount of New Yorker covers, both the print ones and then the digital ones. And it's a great episode, at least. I can't speak to the whole show, but it's great because he talks about being an artist. He talks about the work he does between 9 and 6, because he's got a very tidy, ordered work life. And then he talks about, and there's sort of this tension in the documentary, about what happens in his real life in the hours that aren't 9 to 6. And so a couple quotes from there that I just love. He's talking about how he's trying to be a more careless artist, because you need that, right? You need to refill the well and get sunshine and things like that. But then a more ruthless editor, right? And so you need both that precision and that freedom to really make something good. But it's a great little episode, and there's a little bit about him, creating these things out of nothing that are so amazing and resonating. And I think it's interesting too, since we work in words, to see how other people tell very compelling stories visually. And there's also another great like Chuck Close quote in there about how, really just showing up is what you do. And he talks about that, he says it's comforting, right? Because you don't have to wait for, Christoph Niemann says this, you don't have to wait for your moment of inspiration if you just go and you sit down at your desk every day. And then you just put, in his case, he just says paint something or draw something. But in our case, if you just make some words, you make an outline, you make a plan, you just sit there and you do it every day. And so I think that's an important thing too, to think about just the practice, like not over inspiration, over any of that. Like this is a craft, and he says, make an armor of craft around you, and if you can do that, then you can really, you can make something, but it may take time. It may take many drafts or many projects. And anyways, it's called Abstract. Episode 1 is fabulous. It's free on Netflix. So I would recommend it highly.
Very relevant to what we were talking about today. And, that's actually one of my favorite things about writing, is that it is a craft that you can practice and actively get better at. It's not a pure talent thing. It's like 1% talent and then 99% putting the work in. And that's, that's not a depressing thing. That's a great thing, because, that just means that you can work and you can get better.
And I think that's the thing too. There's so much real fast. There's so much luck and worry and waiting. And, once you get into like the publishing, querying side of things, there's a lot, again, you can't control, but you can control your craft and how much you practice, and you can keep writing better books and keep learning. And so I think that's, if nothing else, that is a very attainable goal as well, and probably a little bit better for your writing career than cleaning your house compulsively.
That is definitely true. What are you going to be working on during today's sprints?
So this is exciting. Based on that episode of Abstract, he does these things called Sunday sketches, which are like Instagram sketches where he takes like a random moment, like a coffee stain on the page, and then he draws something fantastic out of it, like a woman whose headscarf is billowing in the wind, or just random things like a hammer in a certain angle. It looks like a soccer player kicking. And so he takes these objects in the world, three-dimensional objects, and puts them into the drawing and makes something new. I'm going to do the Sunday sketch version of that, of writing, which is just to take some kind of random character and say, I'm going to write 100 words about this thing. So just a very short sketch, just to play and to put that back in. So here's my project. I actually wrote 3,000 words today of the project. So this is the play sprint. So that's my plan. What about you?
That sounds really great, actually. I love the idea of those little snippets. I am not going to be procrastinating during my sprints. I am going to be focusing on disasters edits because, like I said, my goal is to finish tomorrow. Took a half personal day from work tomorrow so that I can really solid focus for 10 hours before I have to go into work for my night shift. So I'll see how much I can get done tonight. So yeah, y'all head over to Twitter on hashtag TNType. We're going to be sprinting until 10 p.m. Eastern, so please join us over there. You can follow us. Our Twitter handles are down in the show notes. And while you're down there, you can go ahead and subscribe as well to our channel. Once we hit 100 people, we can finally have a custom URL. It's my dream. Make it happen, people.
It's a beautiful
yes,
dream.
it is. Thank you. Thank you. All right, folks, this has been Type. Let's go make some words together.
Bye, guys.